What's up, guys? It's Drifts and Lifts here. All right, so today's episode, if you look right here, it looks like we got the blue wagon back on the road. So it's been a while since I've put this on the channel. I think the last video I filmed with it was like 4 months ago or something, but this car's been off the road for a while because when I went to the IPD garage sale last year, I acquired a bunch of parts for pretty cheap, and they were sitting in my garage. And you know, when you have a bunch of shiny parts sitting in your garage, it's tough not to want to just put them on and change your whole setup and, you know, get it retuned and try to improve the performance of your car. So I'm going to pop the hood right now, guys, and show you all the stuff I've done to this car recently. But I gotta say, it is pretty cool to have it back on the road. I definitely didn't get enough time driving this car when you know, I had it on the last setup. But it's kind of funny, guys. The result may be a little more underwhelming than we were hoping. Sometimes when you throw a bunch of new shiny parts at an engine, it doesn't necessarily go how you want it to. A good setup is always a bunch of the right parts combined with one another. So just because you chuck a bunch of cool stuff on an engine doesn't mean it's going to be better than the last setup, which honestly, unfortunately, is kind of what we found out here. But nonetheless, is still a pretty bitchin' setup, makes some good power, and will be very fun to drive. So last time, our setup, we're actually at Post Haste Performance right now, and these are the guys that tuned this car. These are the, you know, the tuning shop that I use for all of my projects and stuff. If you guys ever need tuning work and, you know, any sort of performance automotive stuff done, always hit up Post Haste Performance. So last time we had this car tuned, it made like just over 400 horsepower, a little bit more on the torque side of things. So that was on a stock exhaust manifold, and we're actually running the same turbo, but we were running an internal gate last time. Now, as you can see there, we have our external gate. So the last setup was really good, and it actually, you know, it spooled pretty quickly for having such a big turbo. I did really enjoy it. Even with the stock manifold, it sounded really cool and that kind of thing. But you know, because I acquired all these parts at the IPD garage sale, you know, I figured it would be rude not to install them and see what it can do. So last time we were running a K-cam, which is one of the more aggressive factory Volvo camshafts that you can run. I was lucky to get my hands on a KLR T3 camshaft, so obviously we had to install that in here. We are running now our adjustable IPD cam gear. Really beautiful piece right there, so shout out to IPD for sending that to us. If you guys want one of these, you can check out IPD. Link is in the description of this video as well. So we got this really cool exhaust manifold from Sweden Exhaust. So, you know what, after we installed this, I realized it's probably for a 240 Volvo, because if you're going to buy one for a 740, 940, normally it'll sit the turbo a little farther back. But this was kind of cool because the outlet of this turbo brought it right out to the intercooler, so we only had to do a little piece of silicone here instead of make new piping. So pretty simple. Everything fit pretty good, honestly, no worries there. So this is it's a tube manifold, so obviously it's going to be more prone to being a little bit more laggy, but flowing a bit better in the top end. So we also have our Turbo Smart external wastegate there. So the three big changes that we did were the camshaft, the new exhaust manifold, and then I sent this turbo back to Total Turbo Services. We were discussing things that we could do to maybe squeak a little bit more power out of this turbo. So what he did, this is a Holset HE341. He ended up increasing the size of the compressor wheel to a 60 millimeter. The factory ones in this turbo would be a 56 mil. And then we actually experimented a little bit with something called shaving the exhaust wheel. So Total Turbo, my turbo sponsor, he didn't really know how well this was gonna go. It was more of like an experiment kind of thing. So what you do is you clip the exhaust wheel to essentially let more air flow by that doesn't get caught in the exhaust wheel so much. It's an old trick for guys to try to get more out of their exhaust housings. Unfortunately, they don't make bigger exhaust housings for this turbo. So as you can see, like, it is a big turbo, but the exhaust housing is pretty small, being a 9 centimeter. The HX35s and that kind of thing would be like a 12 centimeter, a 14 centimeter, or even a 16. HX40s go up to 20. So the limitation is probably going to be this housing. The cam, the exhaust manifold, the turbo, and the other big upgrade we did was put bigger injectors in it. So these are 2200 cc now. The last setup we were running out of fuel with the 1000 cc injectors that we had in there. So yeah, it did pretty well. We're pretty happy with it. It is still pretty fun, makes good power. So we're gonna head into the dyno bay, and Dan has pulled up the graphs from the tuning day that we did on this thing. So we're gonna check them out, and I'm gonna show you guys kind of how different the power band is this setup compared to the old setup. All right guys, so we have our dyno graphs laid over one another. So this is the old setup compared to the new setup. And honestly, looking back at this dyno graph, it is a little depressing, I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of funny because all I'm thinking about when I look at this is that, you know, what we're gonna do for the next setup. So the dotted lines are the old setup and the non-dotted lines are the new setup. Obviously we have blue for torque and then we have red for horsepower. So as you can see, the old setup spooled quite a bit earlier. In fact, it was around 500 to 1,000 RPM earlier that the turbo was like in full juice. So the old setup made 422 foot-pounds. The new setup only made 382 foot-pounds. Pretty big reduction in torque, unfortunately. And when you're drifting a car, having a quicker spool with more torque is generally a little nicer thing to have. So peak torque was actually a lot earlier on the old setup, around 4,500. We made peak torque past 5,000 on the new setup. The only place where the new setup kind of shined a little more than the old setup was, past the 6,000 RPM range. Pulled out a little bit better, but these graphs are very similar, and honestly, what we think is that the exhaust housing of the turbo is just simply limiting the engine's power. It can't push enough out that small exhaust housing, so it's more or less the limit of this setup. We've definitely been discussing going with a little bit different of a turbo, a lot bigger on the exhaust side. I have been reading a lot, and it seems like these engines do benefit from a bigger exhaust side of a turbo in comparison to the compressor side. Whereas the turbo setup we have on the car now is more compressor biased, honestly, being a diesel turbo. So the last setup we actually ran a bit less boost as well. So we're running like 33 pounds of boost. This setup we were running about 35 to 36 pounds of boost. And as you can see here, it comes in around the 4,500, I guess 4,500 full spool, whereas last time it was around 4,000. So I'm gonna have fun with this car as it is, you guys. I know I haven't been putting out very many videos, but I do want to start producing more content for you guys. So I think we're just gonna go bash on this setup, have fun with it, and drive it until it explodes. And then we'll look at kind of changing it up. I have a bunch more parts I want to put in this. I have some Wiseco pistons. I would like to do a proper engine build with one of the 2.5 liter stroker cranks that I have in my basement, and actually get a block board, properly do it all, and have a proper built engine. One thing I didn't mention out there, guys, was that this engine setup right now is still on the stock pistons with the stock piston rings that have done over 300,000 kilometers on them. So it's a pretty old, worn out engine that's being pushed pretty darn hard. So we'll see how long it lasts. But yeah, the really depressing part of this graph is in this 3,000 to 4,000 range. You can definitely feel when you're driving the car, it's got a lot less torque just off of boost. The camshaft is definitely probably a little too aggressive for what we're trying to do here. We would want to make all of our power way up in here with a lot bigger of a turbo. And so the camshaft wants to flow up here, but the turbo doesn't. So really, when you're looking at it, it's not the greatest combination of parts. One more thing I should mention is that all the parts that I changed in reality should have lowered the torque and brought the horsepower up. But we definitely are limited in the top end with that turbo. So I think the setup isn't too bad with that tube manifold and the new camshaft, but we just need a turbo that actually wants to flow up in that horsepower level. So on top of the turbo being a limit, another thing I should mention is the fuel pump actually ran out of fuel pressure. So we're running a Volvo 525 Hellcat fuel pump in the tank. We are still running stock fuel lines on it though, so once we got up past the 420 wheel horsepower mark up in the high RPMs, we did start losing fuel pressure, and just the pump simply couldn't keep up with the fuel demands. So when we do eventually revamp this setup, we're gonna wanna do something more aggressive for the fuel pump side of things. We should probably do an aftermarket fuel rail with a different regulator, as well as upgrade the line size the whole way. That should help us out quite a bit if we don't want to go to a whole nother fuel pump setup. But at the end of the day, we may have to do like a surge tank with some really strong dual fuel pumps or something like that, because unfortunately, this was the limit of our fuel setup for the setup. So anyways though guys, I haven't actually taken this car for a good rip yet, because when we dyno tuned it, it was absolutely blizzard outside and we couldn't drive this thing on the street. So finally we have a nice day. Dan's gonna hop in with his laptop and we're gonna go for a rip in it and beat on it a little bit. And he's just gonna check over, make sure everything's safe and good to go. So when I do beat on it, it's not gonna explode. And yeah, so let's go have some fun. We'll chuck the GoPro in the car and we'll see how this thing screams. Something. Can I turn it off? Yeah. All right guys, so unfortunately the first test trip was short-lived and we ran into a bit of an issue. So, you know, we hit second gear, hit full boost, and gate opened, car went good, slammed it into third like you saw in the video there. And it did some weird stuff. So we pulled over and it seemed like it was running on only 3 cylinders. So our first guess was actually what it was in the end. So this setup with this different camshaft, the KLR-T3, when you're running one of these aggressive aftermarket cam grinds, they grind them from a stock base circle. So you need to run lash caps. So I'll show you guys what that is right here. To make up for the extra space underneath these valve buckets, right on the tip of the valve stem there, you actually run a little cap right here. So that just makes up for the space that they take off of the cam when they're building it. And sometimes I've heard on the forums that guys have problems with these lash caps falling off when you're hitting limiter and when you're revving really high RPM. So that's actually what happened to us here, and the lash cap would have kicked off a little bit sideways and the exhaust valve would have been stuck open. So the other problem is if we look at this camshaft here, it's got some really abnormal wear on the lobes right around here. I'll show you the really bad one. This one's pretty bad. Looking at our setup, we're pretty confident that this camshaft was the reason. The spool was quite a bit slower and we lost a lot of torque in the mid-range. So today we're gonna go back to the trusty old K camshaft from Volvo, good factory OEM camshaft. So we're gonna re-shim the buckets to match this camshaft, and actually we have all the original shims that we had from this cam written down already, so that shouldn't be too big of a problem. We're gonna toss the K-cam back in and put this thing back on the dyno today, and hopefully this time it'll be reliable. We're not gonna have to mess with these lash caps anymore. So, and the K-cam was the camshaft that was in there on the previous setup. So it will be interesting to see now with the same cam swapped back in as the previous setup, what the difference of this turbo upgrade with the bigger wheel and the aftermarket exhaust manifold will be. Alright guys, so it is another day now. We got the K-cam swapped back in, got all the valves shimmed properly. So we got it back on the dyno. I only got a couple little videos of this thing on the dyno. You know, it's the same as always. But we just got it finished up here and we're gonna show you guys the results on the dyno graphs here. Alright, so let me try to explain this graph here for you guys. So we got 2 sets of dotted lines. The old setup with the stock exhaust manifold and that kind of thing was the small dotted line. So we got right there. As you can see, really at the end of the day, the best setup was still the old setup. It just spooled so much earlier, about 500 to almost 1,000 RPM earlier. So unfortunately, changing our cam back to the K-cam, it did help quite a bit, but we didn't get that old spool that we used to have there with the stock exhaust manifold, as well as the smaller compressor wheel and non-clipped exhaust wheel. So I would say all in all, guys, putting the bigger compressor wheel in this turbo, as well as clipping the exhaust wheel, was a performance downgrade. In theory, it could have helped, but with this setup, it did not. So the old graph with the old setup, as you can see, the torque comes in so much earlier. We're actually around 4,000 RPM. We're almost 100 foot-pounds up at the old setup compared to what we are now. So the new setup is the solid line. So that is the K-cam that we just got off the dyno. So the K-cam with the new manifold and the turbo modifications. So the K-cam, you can see if we compare it to the KLR T3 cam that we just took out, it did make it spool, you know, a good bit earlier. Torque was up quite a bit. So the K-cam is a lot more of a torquey camshaft than that KLR T3 was. So we did still make 417 foot-pounds of torque at just around 5,000 RPM. And then our peak power was 423 wheel horsepower, which is funny because that is actually more than the KLR T3 cam was able to make. And the reason is because everything happens a lot sooner with the K-cam. The KLR T3 with a bigger turbo, more fuel, and more RPM, it might have actually, you know, been better up in this range. But as you can see, 423 wheel horsepower on the K-cam and this tube manifold and stuff, pretty good. Big shout out to Post Haste Performance though. If you guys ever need a tune, always check out Post Haste Performance, located here in Chilliwack, British Columbia. Dan is an amazing tuner. He always gets everything dialed perfect for me. I've never had a car blow up on his dyno. He always keeps things in check pretty darn good. So definitely thankful to have him as a friend and close by to where I live. You know, able to get this thing on the dyno as much as I do. It's pretty cool because we're able to see a lot of different changes that we do in the setups when I'm going setup to setup. So yeah, shout out to Post Haste. So after many dyno pulls, the old red block engine is still hanging in there. Car's going strong. The only problem we had here on the dyno is my coolant reservoir is a little bit too close to this exhaust housing on the turbo. And as you can see, we're actually starting to melt the coolant reservoir. So that's definitely not what you want to do. We're gonna try to sort that out. I think I'm gonna have to move this over a little bit. That might work. But yeah, we definitely want to get this a little ways away from this exhaust manifold and the exhaust housing, because that is not going to be fun when that explodes when we're ripping on it. So alright guys, so I got Dan in the car with me. We're just going for a little boot down the road. He's got the laptop with him just to make sure everything's good. You know, it's always a little bit different from being on the dyno to actually beating on the car and hitting limiter and holding RPM for a sustained amount of time. So we're just gonna go for a little cruise, hit some boost, see how the car pulls, maybe do a little bit of a drift or something. And yeah, just see how the car sounds, how it pulls, and see what the result is. So this is third gear. I'll just roll into it in third and then go up to fourth, kind of see what happens. Pulls really good. That external gate sounds awesome. The only concern is that I should probably put some heat wrap or some turbo blanket onto the turbo, because it is really close to my hood, and I got a fresh paint job on this hood, on this aluminum hood, to match the rest of the car, so it's probably going to melt and mess with the paint a bit when I'm beating on the car, but we'll see how it goes. Sounds pretty rowdy though. That's awesome. Okay, I'm gonna drift this car, I guess. more tire, I think. All right, guys, so I am really happy with the result there. As you can see in the video, it hauls ass, spins through third. It's struggling to get traction in fourth gear. Obviously, the tires I have on this car right now aren't anything crazy. It's like a 195 something or other. It's not a performance tire, that's for sure. So, you know, once I get some better tires on the rear, it should be able to hook in, you know, fourth and third maybe. It's tough to say, but yeah, big shout out to Dan at Post Haste Performance for whipping this thing up for me. So yeah, we're probably just going to enjoy this setup as it is. Makes cool noises, it's really fun to drive, it looks cool, and yeah, I'm overall really happy with it. So we are going to be moving on from this car. I'm tired of changing the setup and messing around, and it seems like every time I change the setup I don't really drive it a whole lot. I always just acquire new parts and then we go to changing the setup again. But I'm just gonna enjoy it as it is right now. The car is super fast. I don't really need any more power right now. I just wanna have some fun getting sideways on the streets and at the track. But our next thing, we're gonna be throwing money at the gold car. If you guys remember the gold NA sedan that I got going on, we're gonna be actually just bought from Post Haste here a Max ECU. So we're gonna be installing a full standalone in that car, and finally guys, we're going to be installing our built 531 head with the big valves and the crazy cam onto the NA motor, and then we're going to be tuning it and seeing what kind of power we can make on that car. So obviously it's not going to be anything like the turbo car, but we should be hoping to make around 180 to 200 wheel horsepower. Because I'm spending so much money on the ECU and tuning and the wiring and all that kind of stuff, we're gonna hold off on building the bottom end as I'm a little short on funds for that right now. We're gonna put the head on it and see what it makes, have fun with the car for this season, and then down the road we will be doing like the 2.5 stroker crank with the higher compression pistons and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so definitely some fun stuff to come for the channel, guys. But overall, so a couple things I want to mention just about the video and the setup. The KLR T3 cam could be, you know, a good cam in a different setup, maybe with a different turbo and more compression. I'm not really sure what would really help that camshaft out, and I'm also not sure if I even did everything right as far as the lash caps go and that kind of thing. KL Racing says that you have to run 3mm lash caps, and that's what we were running, and it was all good on the dyno, but obviously when we took it for a rip, we chucked one of those lash caps out, and that's definitely a no-go. So yeah, let me know in the comments if we did anything wrong. The fact that the cam was eating itself on the lobes, really strange to me. I'm not too sure what I could have done differently to prevent that. But, you know, obviously some Swedish guys in the comments, I'm sure will let me know what we did wrong. And, but yeah, that cam, I'm not going to be switching back to now because the lobes are eating up on it and the cam's pretty much junk as of right now. But down the road, you know, if one day we do change this setup to a different turbo and all that kind of stuff, maybe we'll look at doing a cam change again. But you know, this K-cam is honestly a pretty well-rounded cam for a 400 horsepower B230 Volvo engine. I'd say it really is a nice kind of in-betweener cam. It doesn't take too much out of the low end, but it also seems to pull pretty good up in the top end as well. So yeah, I think we will leave it as it is and just have fun with this thing. So forgot to mention in this video, guys, if you want to support the channel, we have our Drifts and Lifts Brick Drift Pale Ale shirts. So actually, yo, Harvey, check out the back of my hoodie here.
Oh, that's nice.
Rep it. So yeah, we actually changed this design. We put a hood pipe flame coming out the hood there, and then I think we made my arms like slightly bigger because I've been trying to pump iron in the gym. And we got a roof spoiler, we got a change of wheels, and we changed up the colors of the design a bit. So yeah, new merch coming soon, but we still got these up for sale on the store, so check them out. Anyways, guys, I think I will leave you guys there for today. Like and subscribe for home baked Volvo goods. Peace out.